Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining the Chazy Partners webinar on empowering your shared services GBS with digital transformation. My name is Lee Knowles. I look after marketing at Chazy Partners. Just to let you know, for the quality of the call, everybody will be put on mute, but we do wish to engage with each and every single person. So if you do have any questions, please just use the message or raise your hand function on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer each and every single question which is asked. Just so you're aware, there will be two polling questions in the webinar on slide 8 and slide 26 of the presentation. And all you need to do is take out your mobile phone, click on the camera function button and point it at the screen where you will see a large QR code displayed. And once you do that, it will prompt you to go to a website page and enter in either a multiple choice answer or an individual answer of your choice. That's about it, everybody. So let's begin. I'd just like to introduce you to our two expert speakers of Chazy Partners, which is Phil Searle and Chewy Mitchell.
Thanks, Lee. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, this is Phil Searle. I'll be one of your co-hosts today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Chazy Partners. I've been in business transformation, shared services, GBS technology for about 30 years, as you can see here. Prior to forming Chazy in 2006, I was the corporate controller, chief accounting officer at 3Com Corporation in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then I was a business unit CFO for one of the Ascendant businesses. So I've been both on the practical and the operational side, as well as the consulting side of this. So I'm looking forward to talking to you. I've been speaking at various events and conferences over the last 20 plus years and seen a lot of the trends and changes, and I'll be talking about some of those earlier on before handing over to Chewy. So with that, Chewy, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Phil. Happy to be here. I'm Chewy Mitchell. I'm the head of RPA for Chazy at a global level. I've been around shared services for over 20 years or so. Over the last 6 to 10 years, very focused in IT delivery within shared services, outside shared services. And over the last 6 years, a passionate of automation that includes hyper automation and RPA. Prior to this role, I was the head of shared services for Herbalife Nutrition.
Thanks, Chewy. So what we're going to cover today is, I'll talk a little bit about Chazy just for a second. Chazy Partners, who we are, so you know who we are, where we come from, what we do. And then as I mentioned, I'll be talking about some of the latest trends in the shared services GBS agenda, specifically, well, not specifically, but partly post-COVID and what's happened over that time frame since the last 18 months to 2 years. Then I'll be handing back to Chewy. He's going to dive a lot more into the role of hyper-automation and digitalization. And he'll also cover establishing COEs for digital transformation. And there's a lot of discussion about whether those COEs, where they should be, whether they should be in shared services GBS or in IT or in some other part of the business, or they should be federated or centralized or hybrid. And Chewy will be talking a lot about that in the section 4 today. And then we'll close on some of the latest, the key takeaways and some tips and tricks, I might like to call them, about where you might go from here. So that's our agenda today. All right, so I mentioned Chazy Partners, founded in 2006. We have operations throughout the world, locations throughout the world. We have 3 main delivery pillars. Business transformation includes shared services in GBS. Shared services in GBS has been one of our main offerings ever since the start of the business back in 2006. But we do comprehensive operating model design, from roadmap, design, build, deploy, optimization for organizations globally, for mainly back office, but now more today in the middle office. And that's associated with part of the trend around digitalization we'll be talking about today. So when I say back office, I mean things like finance, HR, IT, procurement, which I often call the big 4, but also contact centers, call centers, facilities management, data management, even more so today as part of these trends as well. And then digital transformation, which we'll be talking about today, is becoming implicitly linked with GBS, as well as broader technology transformation. And then we actually have a dedicated practice within Chazy focusing on RPA, Robotic Process Automation, which is actually one of the components of what you might call the intelligent automation suite, which involves RPA, machine learning, artificial intelligence, blockchain, those sort of latest in intelligent automation, which again we'll be touching on through this session today. But RPA is one of the areas we do soup to nuts, process suitability assessment, pilots, proofs of concepts, design, build, deploy. We develop bots on a contract basis. We might do managed services, and we also do RPA, COE, design and build. Okay. These are some of our clients on the page. I won't go through them, but you can see we cover multiple industries globally, some big names, mainly multinationals, some of the sort of what I would call mid to large companies around the world. And RPA and intelligent automation, we either deliver as part of a broader GBS shared services solution. And that's an important point, actually. We don't do any really shared services or GBS project where we don't at least talk about RPA and intelligent automation. They won't necessarily always be implemented straight away, but it will be part of the discussion about the opportunity specifically linked to technology and digital. And then sometimes we'll do a standalone RPA IA project where we're literally, for example, designing a center of excellence for a client, or we're doing a process suitability assessment, or we're doing contract bot development or whatever. And that's, you see some of those clients on the right-hand side here. So standalone and combined. Okay. Right, let's get into the main content now. So next slide, please, Lee. Okay, so what are some of the main stages of evolution? So for some of you on the call today who I recognize the names of, who've been around this as long as I have, functional or shared services GBS is about a 40 plus year journey now, since really the 1980s, when the first functional shared services organizations were set up. And we've been through a number of different evolutions with offshoring, outsourcing, out of sight, out of mind, non-core processes, bringing it more back in-house with the data, extending supply chains to more linked supply chains, and the latest trends in one office. So there's all sorts of things that have happened over the years, and GBS shared services have had to stay relevant. In fact, I remember in 2008, at a conference in the Shared Services Week event in Orlando in the US, I was the first one to speak about outsourcing in the US, because it was a topic that wasn't really spoken about at that time for mainly political and other reasons in 2008. Look what's happened since then. So what are some of the trends quickly? Stage one is what we might call single functional shared services. So that's really shared services within a function, as it says. So stage reporting to the function, set up within the function, not necessarily truly end-to-end across functions, but end-to-end within the function itself. So that can be finance shared services or HR shared services or whatever. And the focus there initially was largely on cost savings, generally regional, and very much more transactional administrative processes rather than what we might call the more professional and technical. But over years, these are simple breakdowns, and there are puts and takes in here, but multifunctional shared services. So in other words, there was more than one function moving to shared services. And actually there's two trends within there. There's multifunctional as an organization. So you, for example, would have procure to pay, order to cash, hire to retire, maybe IT, all IT service desk, for example, all fall under one multifunctional shared services umbrella with a reporting structure, or there's been what I call multi-single functional shared services, where you stayed functional, but they were moving to this model at the same time. The trend, though, has been, the best practice has been to move more multifunctional from an organizational reporting line perspective, so you can get truly end-to-end, true scale, and really think commercially as almost like a business unit within the company. Stage three is global business services, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, which is really globalization, leveraging of outsourcing, leveraging of latest technology, truly end-to-end, moving up the value chain to professional and technical, as well as the more transaction administrative. So that includes what I would call transaction administrative centers of excellence, and then professional and technical centers of expertise, all under the GBS umbrella. And digitized shared services is clearly leveraging the latest in digital technologies and capabilities. Again, I touched on data, where the collection of all this data in ERP systems and platforms and within GBS and shared services, and the ability to do data mining, et cetera, associated with intelligent automation, et cetera, has become that GBS has become a real opportunity to use that data and drive business decisions. So it's moved more to the mid and front office, as I mentioned earlier on. So we might call that digitized shared services. And then stage 5 is where some organizations are headed and are already there, which is really about phenomenal, true digitalization, becoming a real business partner and really integrating with the business. So not so much the out of sight, out of mind, offshore, non-core, non-strategic, if you don't have to hear about a process, that's okay. Back in the day, it's more about integration, providing tools and technology and data and information to the business. And that's also part of what you may have read about, this one office trend that you've heard HFS talk about in terms of the integration of the back, middle and front office together to provide value to the enterprise. So it's truly integration across the business, which is why it's called Integrated Shared Services, GBS. So those are some of the 5 trends we see out there. So next slide, please, Lee. Okay, so our first polling is going to link on that. Where would you say in your organization you are? You stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, or stage 5? So that's our first polling question. Stage 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Again, as Lee mentioned, if you can click on this, take a photo of this QR code, or I think there's also a link in the chat that you can also link on if you'd rather use your computer. So I'll leave that for a minute while you answer that question. Again, functional shared services, stage 1, multifunctional shared services, stage 2, more GBS, stage 3, more digitization of stage 4, and then integrated shared services, stage 5. And they might be in more than one of those brackets, but put where you think you are, generally speaking, today, or at least where you think you're going to be heading in the short term. Give you a minute to do that, and then Lee, maybe you can let me know when we can show those results.
I think we should go back to the results.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Just a couple more things going on. Yeah, I'm going to assume that stage 4 people have sort of linked to stage 3 or stage 5, rather than specifically called it separately as digitalized. It's not necessarily as clear-cut a stage as the others. But it is interesting that stage 3 is the main one, which is GBS, which is what I would expect. And so it's really about moving from stage 3, leveraging digital, up to more integration, I think is the latest where organizations are going. And then, of course, it's interesting, we still have, the fifth of organizations in functional, and another sort of 14, 15% around the multifunctional, which isn't a surprise. And of course, in what we do today, there are some organizations that still don't do shared services at all. They still have siloed organizations, very country specific or business unit specific, with their own back office teams and functions and processes. So there are organizations that have done nothing to date, which is part of the opportunity / latest trend as well, is moving more into the shared services. For those ones that haven't done it, it's a question of, do you go through stage 1, stage 2, or do you leapfrog straight into stage 3, 4, and 5? And honestly, the answer is many organizations are trying to bypass stage 1, move more into 2 and 3 as quickly as possible, and then into 5. But anyway, thank you very much for your answers to that. Let's move on now, Lee. And then some of the other, so as I mentioned, COVID, and as we're moving beyond COVID, what COVID-19 has done is show, quite frankly, the true value of shared services in GBS in an environment of having to be resilient, having to work from home, having to be remote, having to be scalable, having to adapt to change quickly, really shown its value. And so, when you look at traditional shared services, sort of the phase 1, stage 1 shared services, it tend to be single location, single functional, transaction administrative only, as I mentioned, still with client focus. In fact, the key differentiator of shared services from traditional, what I call centralization, has always been the client focus. But of course, there's been development of that. But today and beyond, when there's all these sort of trends going on, work from home, outsourcing strategies integrated. It's not separate, it's integrated within the whole plan. We're using data and knowledge management. Clearly, business continuity is part of the whole resilience operating model we need to follow. And then we've got this digitalization trend, which is hyper automation, but it's not just hyper automation. It includes cloud, it includes better use of ERP systems, collaboration, communication tools, as you see on here, chatbots. Digitalization is a broad description, which includes components of what I would call better use of traditional ERP, other technologies like cloud and document workflow and scanning, and for example, intelligent OCR. And then you've got the intelligent automation like RPA, machine learning, AI, blockchain that we discussed, and then virtualization of all of the above. And then I mentioned One Office earlier, which is really about enterprise-wide capabilities being scaled across the business through the GBS, proper performance management, a true end-to-end as opposed to a sub-end-to-end, look at processes within function. And I mentioned data, analyzing data. So see, there's some of the trends and opportunities that shared services GBS organizations are facing and leveraging and making the most of today. Okay, thanks, Lee.
I think there's one question from the audience, Phil.
Okay.
Chander Nakpal. What about AR and VR? Is that virtualization or not represented here?
Are you going to cover that one, Chewy?
Yeah, I'll cover Chander's questions later on. But yeah, when we think about digitalization and we think about artificial intelligence, everything is covered, right? So we are not talking about pure and straightforward automation using RPA, but rather the broader transformation and digitalization of the enterprise as part of the digital transformation of organizations. So yes, AR and VR, it's represented here as well.
Okay, thank you. And just my last slide on trends. I mean, I've sort of talked about this, but it's just summarized on the page. Automation and digitalization, the One Office concept, the future of work, which includes remote hybrid working, the integration of outsourcing I touched on, agility and resilience associated with business continuity and end-to-end processes. Next generation, that's more about the people. So it's about making sure that people have the right roles, right skills, right training, right engagement, and right motivation as part of this. So it's about understanding and optimizing talent and understanding and optimizing the way your workforce performs. And we've seen things on the press. I'm sure you've seen about the Great Resignation and the shorter time frames for work and the flexibility of work environments and people moving jobs. That's all part of this whole trend that GBS can leverage, but needs to be aware of. So it's a risk and an opportunity as part of all of this. And then performance, it's about understanding what the operating really means. It's about leveraging data. It's still about quality service levels and always should be. And I'll come back to that at the end. Okay. All right. So next slide. So you may have seen this. Transformation is never for the fourth industrial revolution. So next slide, please, Lee. So what is the fourth industrial revolution? You may have heard this talked about, but it's really the very latest in emerging technology, things like the hyper automation we talked about, robotics, AI, blockchain. But it's not just about that. It's about 3D printing, autonomous vehicles. Everything that's going on out there at the moment, you could classify as the fourth industrial revolution, which really, as it says here, blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological. So very quickly, what were the other three? Well, the first was using water and steam power to mechanize production. Second was electric power for mass production. The third was the digital revolution prior to this one, which is things like moving from analog to digital, the PC, the internet, and ICT, it's information and communications technology, telecoms, etc. So this latest bucketed trend is called the fourth industrial revolution. Just a quick side note, the first time I came across RPA was probably about 6 or 7 years ago at Orlando, at one of the conferences there. And when I first heard about it, I thought, is this real? Is this a trend? What is this part of? And that's when I first really started to understand that this fourth industrial revolution was happening. So that was 6, 7 years ago. And there really is this acceleration, digitalization of everything of our world, of how we operate. And that's been seen in GBS and shared services specifically, both as a receiver of that, but also as a deliverer, provider, engine room for that change. Okay, Chewy, I think you're going to take it from here.
Thank you, Phil. And as you mentioned, right, one key differentiator of the fourth industrial revolution, Phil, is the speed, right? The speed for which changes happen, new technologies come together, and converging technologies, when you use multiple and different technologies to come up with new solutions and new ways to automate. I'll talk a little bit about hyperautomation later on, but more and more. And you mentioned that you first looked at RPA 6 years ago, and automation in itself, right, using technologies like RPA and scripting, it's not as old as shared services. So that 40 years worth of shared services, I will put it from an automation perspective, probably 15 to 20 years, and only over the last 10 years, really focusing on RPA automation. But recent studies show that both decision makers and employees are moving away from this fear factor, which was, automation is just about losing jobs, it's just about removing workers from the workforce, and it's not that, right? It's more and more decision makers believe that RPA should and is becoming a key component and a core component of the digital transformation of the company. And employees, right, within COVID, right, we saw a very peculiar, right, trend, which was companies, instead of putting on hold RPA projects, they started accelerating, right? They realized that this remote virtual work associated and combined with digital assistants or bots, right, was the way to go, right? So even employees are realizing that digital assistance is only that, right? They can really focus in more value-added activities, and as transactional and mundane work gets automated, right? So this is a very clear trend for us, where decision makers and employees are embracing automation as part of their daily. Next chart, please. So just level setting, right? Ourselves as an audience, different concepts, right? And just as shared services, RPA and intelligent automation and hyperautomation, it's all about the journey, right? It's not a destination. There are multiple technologies and there are multiple stages, right? And this is the combination of both technologies and stages. So attended automation is the very basic, where an individual responsible for one specific process gets an automation in place in his laptop for his specific set of activities and processes. Moving to unattended automation, mainly used for backup processes. That's why it is becoming increasingly important for shared services and GBS to really adopt and grow and scale automation. Unattended automation is mainly used for automating backend, finance, HR. Previous chart. Thank you. HR, finance, procurement, IT delivery, and in these early stages, right, you start adding other technological components like OCR or intelligent document processing. Then digitize RPA, it's when you start orchestrating, right, when you have bots interacting with humans in a workflow, and then that human interacting with the next bot in the same workflow, or a bot providing inputs to a new automation for aiming to look at automating end-to-end, right? And automating end-to-end means the coordination and the orchestration of individuals with automations. Chatbots becomes part of this digitized RPA stage. Machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, combining data analytics and aiming to help with decisions based on algorithms, data patterns, rather than just pure hard coding. And artificial intelligence, which is the overarching concept, and aiming to move from only using algorithms to more of a cognitive automation, using some of the machine learning, using statistical modeling, but aiming to continuously optimize decision making. And of course, that's where you keep adding, right? You keep adding the chatbots, the machine learning, then the artificial intelligence.
Chazy, there is one question here, and I'll just quickly ask it and maybe answer
Sure.
it. The question is, to what extent is RPA truly needed versus a workaround for ERP system? Are ERP companies working to close the gap, eliminate the need for RPA? That's a great question, a long question. Let me just answer it this way. ERP was never an end-to-end solution, let's be honest with you, right? I mean, ERP for decades of saying, you know, let's automate end-to-end P2P or R2R or O2C or whatever. It never did. There were always lots of manual processes and additional technologies required within there. Even today, in the best ERPs, there's still a lot of manual input, lack of integration. So, and of course, there's other elements outside the ERP system. So, for example, the web itself and other data sources. RPA is a great enabler of eliminating or automating manual processes that were still there regardless of ERP, or actually maybe as a result of ERP to some degree. And so you can think of RPA as being part of this solution toolkit to help you automate end-to-end processes of which ERP is a part. Then there are other elements of where RPA is being used as a solution to attempt to automate processes that should be automated by ERP. In those, I would say, yep, that you should always be looking at your technology roadmap, and RPA should be on it, and you shouldn't be implementing RPA if it's going to be immediately superseded by something else, but it's the word immediately. So what we sometimes say is, if there are known RPA programs that are a throwaway, but still provide value in the term within which they're implemented, an ROI within that term, until such time as maybe a future upgrade or maybe a future technology or ERP solves that. So RPA sits alongside and partners with. It shouldn't replace ERP. It should enable and only act instead of ERP where ERP is not working at the current time for whatever reason. So that's just a long answer to that. But anyway, keep going. All right, Chewy.
Yeah, and RP, it's in some ways and fashions feel really filling the gaps of on the promises and expectation sets by ERPs that they were automating end to end. And at the end of the game, right? And at the end, RP is needed to cover those unfulfilled expectations in automation from an ERP perspective. Speed to implementation, clearly important, right? We see today, right? And we see today automations being done in 4 weeks. So whenever you talk about, you know, ROI and speed of execution and speed to automate, that's one of the beauties of RPA, being able to execute projects in 4 to 6 weeks. Next chart, please. So what is in the core? We always want to have the very basic automation, right? We mentioned how automation is quickly to execute, quickly to implement, quick ROI, and hyper automation is not a new technology. Hyper automation is a combination of different technologies where you aim to start automating more complex processes and processes that in the beginning were not considered a part of the automation scope. So it's a mix of technologies. Using advanced analytics, process mining, artificial intelligence, optical character recognition, intelligent document processing, and of course, machine learning. And it's almost moving from pure basic automation, as I said, to more complex automation, more end-to-end automation using different technological components.
There's another question here, Chewy, from Lisa. Where do workflow tools and smart data capture fit in your key concepts, list of key concepts? Where would you put them? Either on this slide or the previous slide. Yeah.
It's here. It's within BPM, right? So workflows and bots are very good friends, right? So actually, when we go and deploy projects, we always about what is your strategy on workflows? Because at the end of the day, what the workflow gives you, it's a repetitive process with an electronic output, and that electronic output is the perfect raw material for a good automation in production. So it's under BPM, and workflows needs to be part of the strategy, right? Just as we talk about hyper automation and making sure that you look at things end to end, workflows and RPA come very nicely together. Trend that we're seeing, we talked about 40 years worth of shared services, evolving from stage 1 through stage 2, digitizing shared service, integrated shared services, and COEs for automation is the same, right? So what we've been seeing over the last few years is that shared services and GBS are starting to evolve, right? They started as big consumers of automation. So due to the nature of shared services and GBS, you have transactional processes. And what transactional processes give you is great potential for automation. So first stage from a shared services perspective and automation is big consumer of automation. But what happens through time, individuals sitting in the shared service center, like subject matter experts, start learning about what automation is and what automation is not. So we're seeing that many shared services are setting up centers of excellence, right, to provide automation services first just for the center, and through time becoming not only the learners or the students of automation, but the teachers. So what that basically means is service providers setting up COEs for automating processes within the center and within the network of centers for shared services, but providing services as well to the middle office and to the front office as a new service, right? As a more value-added services for other organizations. And that's not only about RPA, right? We're seeing that more and more, just as hyper-automation is the integration of multiple technologies, centers of excellence are evolving from pure RPA center of excellence to hyper-automation and to digital centers of excellence. And we'll speak a little bit more about digital centers of excellence later on. But one key concept that you want to keep in mind is that just as you go and set up your automation program, when you are in the very early stages, centers of excellence are not a must, right? So you can always initiate projects just going through pilots and proof of concepts, but once it's real and once your plan is to scale a program, the governed body that is set up by the Center of Excellence is a must. Putting together best practices, standard ways of automating and documenting automations is very important. So as you think about scaling, Center of Excellence becomes a must. And as you set up your COE, looking at the end-to-end lifecycle management and automation, from the creation of the idea through the deployment into production, measuring this business intelligence layer on the top of your automation programs becomes increasingly important. Are your bots working properly? What is the real-time savings for the organization and the optimization of using automations across different organizations, the use of RPA across different departments? That business intelligence layer it's becoming increasingly important. So think about COEs end-to-end from discover to measure, right? And that includes how do you reach out to new organizations in the middle office and in the front office to come up with a new service offering as a COE for automation. Next chart. So what is a Center of Excellence? Center of Excellence is in essence a central governed body. And what it really does is that help runs automations across the entire organization. And what it basically provides is best practices. It provides business analytics through insights, structure, and support to the business. And always, when you think about your Center of Excellence, don't forget that you're a service provider, right? So service provider means, how do I set up my client interaction framework, just like we do in shared services, in order to track ideas coming, ideas qualified and evaluated, automations in production, automations saving real dollars, saving real time in production. And it's not about the technology, it is about the combination of the right processes for intake. It is about the right training and about using technology. So the combination of people, process, and technology, that's what a real Center of Excellence is. And as I mentioned before, it is increasingly becoming a launch platform, right, for the organization. It was born in the center, used just for the center, and later on at a different stage, providing services outside of GBS and shared services. Many roles, when you think about roles, and some of these roles, they don't need to be full-time, but it's really important that you have the right sponsorship at the top. There always need to be a champion within your COE setup. Change management, increasingly important. How do you remove this fear factor from the organization and your internal clients? It's through change management. So change manager in the form of the same role as the same individual as the RPA champion, or someone that is assisting the RPA champion with change management. Business analysis is very important, right? So don't forget about the importance of proper process work in the setup of your COE. And of course, you always have your development team, and you need to think about managed services. Bots, once in production, they break. They need maintenance. They need someone to look after those automations in production. So managed services, very important. Service support for bots, very important as well. Different models for COE, right? There's not a single answer and a perfect answer for all. No one size fits all. There are basically 3 different models, right? And 3 different setups. Centralized, it's the preferred model for IT. It's everything goes through the same pipe. Everything is controlled through the same management system. Everything has the same intake, right? And deployment and approach. But what we're seeing, right, that just as in all the other IT projects, think about RPA and quicker to implement, right? We said 4 to 6 weeks. What that basically means is that once you look at the pipeline in a decent sized organization, the number of automations that you are going to have in your pipeline, it's 10 or more, it's 20, it's 30. And how do you handle, right, with only a central team, all those automations in your pipeline? So those, some of these advantages is that, you know, the priorities not being properly attended for all the organizations in the business. When you move to the, you know, totally decentralized or federated model, it's different business units and different geographies setting up their own automation program. It's very fast, right? There's nothing wrong with this model, right? But at the end of the day, what the risks that you run into, it's picking different technologies, using different approaches for automation, and using different ways to perform automation. So disadvantages is the lack of control and the lack of standards. And what we're seeing, and for these 2, we see kind of a steady state. Organizations that made up pick the central or the decentralized model, they're staying and they're watching, but they're not, that this model is not really growing. The model that more and more we're seeing is the hybrid model, which is a central governed body that takes the policy, selects the technology, but then decentralizing low complexity and medium complexity to business units where the knowledge resides. So what is the beauty of the hybrid model is that you have subject matter experts and you have business analysts sitting in the business units closer to the business, closer to the operation, and being able to deliver automations faster and quicker.
So one question, it's an interesting question, Joey, so you can have a go. So how would a COE interact with a wider GBS organization in the context of stages 4 and 5 we talked about earlier, which is digitized GBS and integrated GBS? The specific question is, would you have a hyper automation COE separate from an RPA COE? That's the specific question. So how would you answer that? And I can add a comment.
I think hyper automation is the next stage of an RPA center of excellence. It's how do you keep bringing, and it doesn't mean that you're going to create a bureaucratic large organization. It means that you start adding skills in the existing COE, you start adding other technologies in the COE, and you start reaching out to other organizations, right? So it's an evolution. To me, it's an evolution. Of course you can have, right? And this is back to this hybrid model. Of course you can have, even within your GBS ecosystem, different locations providing automation services, but under the same central governed body that first starts like RPA and then evolves to hyper automation.
Right. So, I mean, I think you answered it, but basically integration doesn't necessarily mean centralization of all reporting lines or structures, but that centralization can help enable integration. But I think you've answered it, Chazy. So hopefully that's answered the question. Okay.
Moving on. So as you think about RPA and hyperautomation and machine learning, there are things that you need to act, right? So RPA is here, it's been here for a long time. So you need to act. And that means even shifting existing roles into RPA roles. You need to plan for the future, and planning for the future. We talked about workflows or BPM that need to be part of your strategy. Machine learning, artificial intelligence. Don't get confused with, if I don't have artificial intelligence in my organization today providing automation services or artificial intelligence services, there's something wrong with my strategy. It's all about use case. So when you start adding machine learning and artificial intelligence, first go back to process and go back to use cases. If you don't have the use case, keep automating the way you're automated, keep using workflows, keep using RPA. Use cases will come later in the game as the organization matures. Talent development, roles of the future, very important. Watch them, plan now. And to watch citizen development, very controversial topic, right? Do we delegate automation skills at the desk level? Do we want to have developers at the desk level? Do we keep centralizing the development work? There's no perfect answer, but citizen development certainly something to watch for the future. Use cases, right? We have many use cases, right? But we decided to pick one which is very easy to understand, right? And it's from a university that we've been working for years, doing shared services transformation and doing process transformation, doing RPA. And it's all about, how do you select the right processes? So before coming up with this automation, the Chazy team and the Berkeley team, they looked after 20 to 30 processes. They performed process suitability assessments, and they came up with this automation that basically automates, right, the manual work that used to happen in the hiring and onboarding processes for the university. Next.
Yeah, Chewy, quick questions. It's actually a real long question, so I'm going to try and get to the point. So I think at the end of it, it says the concern about the question here is how do you ensure that large implementations of RPA programs can be managed in a coordinated, controlled fashion? The concern is in-house developed RPA programs without a robust governance framework could be undermined by the loss of one or two individuals, a loss of knowledge, the loss of, in other words, these standalone RPA implementations, how can they be governed to make sure that they're not high risk and they're lost if people leave or if documentation isn't appropriate? So it's really about governance of RPA programs, especially in a more decentralized model.
When you think about governance, right, you need to think about it end to end, and that's a very valid concern. And actually, the concern expressed in that question, we're hitting that from many customers now, right? Is how do I ensure that once I lose my third-party development company or my own internal developers, I don't lose the knowledge, right? And it goes back to the discipline of documenting each and every step in the life cycle of the automation. And that what basically mean, at least you need to have 4 documents. You always need to have, first of all, central repository, and you need to have your PDDs properly documented and approved. And they can be approved in a way of workflow, so they can be just sitting in that repository. You always need to have your SDD in place and updated, testing tracker, and handbook. Those are at least 4. If your governance structure and policies and practices don't include at least these 4 documents, the likelihood of losing the knowledge, right, it's going to be higher. And how do you control really the citizen development and all the automations and all of that is, how do you control your deployment processes? Once you deploy automations into production, what is the documentation in your handbook that needs to be included? So any individual that is in the controller world, and with controller, I mean monitoring and supporting automations in production, they have what they need to continue to have the automation keep up and running.
There's a second part of the question, which I'll quickly comment on, and then but it's about, how do you make sure you stay on top of changes to systems that RPA is integrated with? So that's really part of the whole managed services part of the service, whether that's done internally or externally or a bit of both. You need to stay on top of any changes to technology. So for example, changing another technology you integrated could call the RPA, the bots to fall over. So you need to have that managed services constantly reviewing 24/7 any issues. But as part of that, so that's the 24/7 monitoring and the integration with the broader business. And then that links into the governance structure to make sure that everyone's coordinated in terms of understanding implications of changes in technology. So that's part of the broader governance. anyway.
And that's a very good point, Richard, right? I mean, when we say GBS and shared services have and are becoming service providers for automation, it doesn't mean that we're leaving IT outside.
Correct.
As part of the central governed setup, IT, it's core, right? So IT is not, it's not outside the COE, right? IT is a service provider to COE, and it's even policy makers, right? IT is the policy makers for many of the things that are happening in the COEs for automation and hyper automation. So IT, it's core to it. So good point, Richard, thank you. And in the interest of time, I'm just gonna go very quickly to the next chart. Since I know you. Next chart. Next chart. We already looked at this chart, didn't we? So I think we're gonna go direct to the polling question. Is that the next thing we have here?
Yeah.
Okay, so just
the reason why we had that chart in was just to remind people of this before the question. But go ahead, Chewy. Yeah.
So just a reminder, we talk about this is a journey, right? We said this is a journey. There's RPA, there's workflows, BPM, machine learning, chatbots, artificial intelligence, process mining. So we would like to know from you at the stage where you are in your automation journeys, what type of technologies are you using or aiming to use?
Yeah, what's your specific technology focus we're asking here? What are the technologies you're implementing as part of the hyper-automation trend? Are you focused on RPA? Are you focused on chatbots? Are you focused on blockchain? Are you focused on machine learning? What are you focused on? Are you focused on workflows? It's just to get an idea of what the main technology solutions within the hyper-automation portfolio people are looking at right now.
And friendly reminder, if you have your cell phone, you just have to take a picture, right, to the QR code. It will direct you to a web page. And also you have the option, just click it in the chat, right? There's a link there so you can access the poll question. And this is free text, right? So feel free to start adding any, and you don't need to add only one. If you are using a couple of technologies, you can do a couple of inputs, 3 inputs, 4 inputs. Just feel free to share with us, right, and with the audience, what type of technologies you are using, aiming to use. So as expected, Phil, right, and this is really nice, this is really cool, right? We're seeing RPA at the top. OCR, right, it is interesting, right? Mining, process mining, chatbots.
Yeah, obviously the larger the words, the more we're having that answer. That's how it works. So clearly RPA and OCR are the big guys, and then you've got workflow and process mining following up, but which is not a surprise, but even based on the questions we've been having. Yeah,
and more, just a quick comment there, right, for the team. When you go and look after OCR projects, right, the process work is very important, right? OCRs are gonna always facilitate the way unstructured data is processed. But before deploying an OCR project, make sure that you look at the alternative of process simplification. And even when you think about, I love the question about workflows, right? Even when you think about OCRs before jumping into an OCR project, really perform a deep dive in the process, whether you can make that information that is meant to be OCR, you can do it through a workflow, and that workflow can be the input to the automation. So OCR, there's nothing wrong with OCR, it's widely used, but the point that I'm trying to make is before jumping into OCR, consider workflows and consider making that information electronically so it's more bot friendly. Next chart. So as we've been saying, right, RPA and centers of excellence is all about the journey, right? And more decision makers are realizing that it's not about using just automation technology, but really moving to becoming a digital organization. And just as Phil mentioned in stage 4, that's digitized shared services. And that's what it means for automation or COEs as well. Is how do you become that core component of the digital transformation of the company? Next chart, please. And when you think about evolution, it's how do I come up with a strategy that moves from the pure RPA automation to a more digital center of excellence? When you look after workflows, when you look after business intelligence, you become part of the ERP loop of decision making, and you provide ERP support services. So when you think about the future and digital COEs, it's automation, but it's also analytics, and it's also infrastructure, including ERP. Having the right leadership in place in your COE, it's very important. That people factor, culture factor is increasingly important. And when you look at it, don't forget about process, right? It's process, and process. What we always say, right? And this is just an example in the automation space. Not all good ideas for automation are necessarily good bots in production. And what basically makes automations fail is the lack of proper process work. Next chart. So it's all about the journey, right? So shared services and leading GBS organizations are now aiming to provide or already providing digital services. And digital COEs become an enabler, right, of integrated GBSs and shared services and digital shared services. So it comes together, right? It's part of the same evolution path. And when you think about these digital COEs, there's going to be the need, right, to use external and internal skills, right, both from the business and IT, with a clear strategy on where do you want to head from an automation, business intelligence, and machine learning technology layers, and always keep in mind the same concepts of shared services and GBS, client interaction framework. Even though you are a COE, a digital COE, you're still a service provider, right? So how do I set up the right mechanisms, right, to go after new opportunities and offering new services to the organization? And as I mentioned before, providing technology services not only to the centers and the GBSs, but also to the middle and front offices as well. And that's it. I'm going to turn it over back to Phil so we can wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Chewy. Thanks, Chewy. So if you go to the next slide, please. So just before, there've been a couple of questions about the content, the deck. So we can send out a copy of the slides to all the attendees. So I'll ask Lee and Melissa to coordinate sending the deck back out to everyone who attended. There's also been a question about, do we provide a training certificate? The answer to that is not a specific training certificate, but if you'd like a confirmation of attendance, we're very happy to do that too, in terms of you attended and the content of the session. So just as we close out, thank you very much for attending, but I just wanted to talk about the top 10 action points, what we think everyone should be doing. Firstly, you should be acting. You know, everything's moving so fast these days. You need to move forward, because if you don't move forward, you'll be very quickly falling behind. And that's always been true, but it's even more truer. It's truer, more truer. It's even truer today than ever has been with how everything's moving so fast. But having said all of that, you still, I even touched on this right at the start, you still need to get the basics right. You still need to have an effective operating model and an effective, what we call client interaction framework or service management framework or service delivery framework, because at the end of the day, it's always about providing service at a quality level in an effective, efficient way to your customers. In shared services, largely internal, but not always internal. It's about that. So we call it the 9 key components of CIF. And you should be thinking about those 9 key components all the time, regardless of where you are in the context of where you are. Because if you don't deliver service to your internal clients, you can be as fancy as you like from a digital perspective, but it won't work. But remember that, and of course, integrate digital within that. Make an assessment of where you are along those stages we talked about, and then think about where you're going to move. Those 5 stages were fairly broad brush buckets, but it's about moving to a more digital, more integrated, more end-to-end, more up the value chain, more business partnering, more value, more data. It's how do you move our way up that value chain while still retaining the effectiveness of your operating model. Identify capability of services, become a service provider as part of this whole value, more integration, more front office focus, and as part of the one office concept. So what value can you provide to your business partners rather than just being an engine room for transaction processing historically? We talked a lot here, of course, about digital and automation. So make sure you take a look at those and move forward. I'm not talking about this today, but there have been challenges around doing pilots and proofs of concepts and how you then scale those. Separate discussion. We've touched on it a bit today, but you need to make sure you think about how you're going to scale once you've had some success. We have touched on some of that today. Look into building this digital COE within shared services GBS if it doesn't exist elsewhere, and Chewy's talked about that. Determine how far you want to go with the future of work. So the hybrid, remote, flexible working. I think the answer is you're going to have to, everyone is going to have to consider a hybrid version of that. It's the question of how hybrid is that hybrid? And I think that varies from industry to industry, company to company, region to region, even country to country. But clearly it's linking to the whole talent development, talent acquisition, talent retention side of things. And then linking to that, make sure you understand what skill sets are required for the next generation shared services, including technology and digital, not just those. It's about service delivery. It's about attitude. It's about remote working. It's about value up the value chain. It's about not being siloed into particular buckets. So think about the required skill sets and the competencies required. And then have a data strategy, right? I mean, if you've got a lot of data, great, but what are you going to do with it? I mean, just having stacks and stacks of data is great, but then that could become even more confusing if you don't have a strategy to leverage that data, manage that data, control that data, access that data, report on that data. That gets into some of what Chu was talking about, but make sure you have a data strategy. And then look at your business continuity plans, look at your resiliency plans. Clearly, we've just been through a major business continuity resilience challenge over the last 18 months to 2 years. But obviously it's tested some plans, but keep looking and revisiting those, because GBS, as I mentioned at the start, and shared services has been actually an enabler for resilience in globally challenging and changing times. And then the final point, as we just close things out, and I like to say this, it's do things differently, because that's the whole point. If you just don't change anything, then you don't change anything. If you don't think about doing something differently, you don't do anything differently. So it's about making the move, deciding what you're going to do, and make a decision, test it, pilot it, adapt, change, but keep making those decisions. Because if you don't, your organization will become stale, and actually you won't be staying up with your own front office and the requirements of the general market. So with that, I'm going to say, thank you very much for all of your attendance. I've got 1 minute to go. Thank you for your attendance. Any follow-up questions, please come back to us. We do have some content that might be relevant, which we can send to you separately. So please send a note to Lee about that. Three examples here. White papers, understanding the value of an RPA COE, the latest state of the global shared services market report we helped to contribute to for 2021. And then finally, 7 steps to implementing RPA in your enterprise. There are 3 white papers. If you'd like those, please contact Lee and we can send those on to you. But with that, I'm going to close the session. Thank you again for your time, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.